Right now, chaos and darkness reign in Russia. Ukraine is responding blow for blow. The hellish revenge of the Ukrainian armed forces is descending upon the Russians. Even as we speak, Russians are living without light or heat. And this winter in Russia will be deadly. A sensation. Ukrainian drones have broken through Moscow's defenses. The most important targets have been wiped off the face of the earth. The enemy will remember this day of strikes for a long time. The Russian offensive has come to an end. Pokrovsk has become a thorn in the occupiers' throats. Western analysts have revealed something shocking. The turning point has already arrived. The Ukrainian armed forces have managed to trap the Russians. Here's what's happening at the hottest spots on the front lines right at this moment. Solovyov has gone off the rails. Strikes on oil refineries are bringing Russian propaganda to its knees. There's no way to hide it anymore. A meltdown live on air. This will surprise you. Emergency Europe is building a drone wall. The secret project is ruining Putin's plans. Shock. Ukraine is at the center of global defense. And a sensation. The mystery of the Nord explosions. Next on streams has been revealed. All this and more in our upcoming report. A hotspot is a place or area that is known for having a higher level of activity, interest, or importance compared to its surroundings. The term is often used in different fields such as geography, technology, and social life to describe locations that attract attention or people for specific reasons. On the
night of November 9th, the Ukrainian armed forces struck the Voronezh thermal power plant. After the strike, electricity went out in several homes but then came back on. The Voronezh thermal power plant is one of the largest suppliers of thermal energy in the region and provides it to 4 districts of the city.
It happened right before my eyes. I had just stepped out onto the balcony. Right over there. Apparently along the wires. No, well, I heard 3, but they're saying 4. In
Belgorod, this incident was an attack, leaving tens of thousands of residents without power. The governor of the region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, stated that the damage is very serious.
As a result of last night's rocket attack, there is significant and substantial damage to the power and heating supply systems of the city of Belgorod. But our energy workers, as always, are heroically trying to cope with the task at hand. They are now diligently working to carefully restore and repair everything that was damaged and destroyed by our enemies.
A day earlier, Ukrainian drones struck energy facilities in Saratov, Engels, and the Volgograd region. Power outages were also reported there. With massive drone and missile attacks, Russia is trying to plunge Ukraine into a blackout. In turn, the Ukrainian army is delivering symmetrical strikes on Russia's energy sector. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the authorities are ready and will not only defend the infrastructure, but also strike back in response.
What will happen with electricity? Today, it's hard for me to say. We will be ready for any retaliatory challenges. We work on this every day. We will defend, we will fight. The Russians must know that step by step, we will increase the production of everything so that they also feel what we feel. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine.
In 2025, there is a trend toward a growing electricity deficit in Russia. As of October of this year, the shortage of capacity in the power grid reaches tens of gigawatts. This was reported by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
Due to demand from industrial, residential, and municipal consumers exceeding the total generation of all power plants, as of October of this year, the shortage of capacity in the power grid has already reached 25 gigawatts. Despite attempts by the REF government to introduce at least some measures to stabilize its energy system, such as monetary compensation or discounts on electricity bills for voluntarily reducing consumption during peak hours, as well as disconnecting consumers who do not require guaranteed power supply, the growing electricity deficit indicates a systemic crisis in the Russian energy sector. The Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
In addition to wear and overload, systematic strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces are also affecting the Russian energy system. If Ukrainian strikes even partially damage Russian thermal power plants, this will cause significant problems for Russia's energy sector. The Ukrainian armed forces have already brought a blackout in southern Russia 60% closer.
Strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces are gradually knocking out high-voltage substations, which make it possible to transfer electricity from one region to another. If the thermal power plants are also destroyed, then they will face a much more difficult situation than we do. Alexander Karchenko, director of the Energy Research Center.
Not only Russian regions, but also Moscow are suffering from Ukrainian drone attacks and the lack of electricity.
This has a very serious, not just propagandistic impact directly on the Kremlin. Let me remind you that one of the reasons for launching the so-called special military operation was the issue of guaranteeing the security of the Russian Federation itself. At least that's how Putin and his inner circle explained it. We are now seeing how the war is coming directly to Moscow. And it's not just Muscovites. We can see that the geography of Ukraine's drone attacks is expanding.
Ukrainians have long since gotten used to and adapted to power and heating outages. But for Russians, this is an unexpected surprise. So it's time to start stocking up on matches, candles, and firewood.
Shock, the Russian offensive has collapsed. At turning point, Pokrovsk is the hottest spot right now. The enemy's pace is catastrophically dropping. What is happening now at these two main points of the war? We will show the whole truth about how the Ukrainian armed forces disrupted Russia's plans. Watch this.
The Institute for the Study of War reports that Russia is reducing pressure on positions in Pokrovsk. According to analysts, the pace of the Russian offensive has slowed due to colossal losses. And now those who managed to survive in the local assaults are waiting for reinforcements and hoping to restore logistics.
The Russians have reduced their activity in the city and decreased the number of movements. In this way, the Russian forces are trying to minimize their losses and are waiting for reinforcements from their main forces. This is confirmed by attempts of Russian forces to establish logistics through the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. In particular, in this area, the Russians tried several times to transfer personnel using vehicles and motorcycles. The defense forces did not allow this to happen.
At the same time, the occupiers' main objective today is to cut off Ukrainian logistics. Command notes that they have not succeeded in doing this, primarily thanks to the timely deployment of special units from the GUR, SBU, and SSO.
It was indeed possible from a tactical standpoint. Here we can note two objectives, tactical and strategic, to repel them tactically. The positions to the north of the city of Pokrovsk itself and from Pokrovsk the enemy's positions do affect logistics, which in many ways are indeed under the fire control of the Russian occupiers. However, this is not physical control. And today it has been possible to create some alternative, albeit small, logistical corridors through which troops can still be supplied.
Meanwhile, the East grouping of the Ukrainian armed forces reported yesterday that the defense forces have achieved partial success in the city. Assault units are clearing the city house by house and pushing the enemy toward the outskirts. As the military says, it is simply impossible to clearly define the positions of the sides in Pokrovsk today. After all, the entire settlement has effectively turned into a gray zone.
Our defense forces are also operating in small groups. They are pushing the Russians out, or at least it is clear they intend to drive the Russians out of the industrial zone and from the northern and central parts of Pokrovsk. It is hard to say exactly how this success will continue to develop further in the future.
Meanwhile, Russia is trying to advance beyond the settlement, attempting to encircle it. From the north, meanwhile, the enemy suffers huge losses every day, essentially achieving no results. On the contrary, units, particularly Azov, which managed to eliminate the Russian breakthrough toward Dobropilya, are moving ever closer directly to Pokrovsk. This guarantees that the city will not be encircled, at least from the north.
By and large, the completion of this counter-offensive operation is smoothly transitioning and will most likely continue to transition into the elimination of this northern snot of the Russians, which is aimed at encircling Pokrovsk-Myrnograd. Therefore, on the one hand, the enemy's plan is clear and well understood, and our command's plan is also clear and specifically aimed at deblockading.
Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky also commented on the situation. According to him, Pokrovsk is now a continuous fortified area. There are several places where the Russians managed to get through the engineering barriers, but the AFU knows exactly where these places are. Therefore, the situation as a whole is under control. At the same time, Syrsky added that the command already has plans B and C for all possible developments. Meanwhile, the Russian group has identified the Kharkiv region, specifically the city of Kupiansk, as the second most important pressure point. Another Russian statement about encircling Ukrainian troops there was refuted by Viktor Trehubov, head of the press service of the Joint Forces. In turn, military analysts note that the enemy is trying to use the Pokrovsk tactic here. However, its results are much more modest.
In the Kupiansk direction, in Kupiansk itself, the situation is considerably different. Our command and our defenders have managed to bring the situation under control. And the enemy's actions in the city turned out to be less effective than the Russian commanders had hoped.
Another important reason for the pressure on Kupiansk, according to experts, is to prevent Ukraine from transferring reserves to Pokrovsk. As is known, Putin gave his army until Friday to capture the city. And now the Russian command has concentrated half of its entire grouping in Ukraine right here.
Putin has set a strategic objective to capture the Pokrovsk agglomeration. He has not managed to advance in all sectors. He assumed that this would be an advance in Sumy region, Kharkiv region at the 3 points we talked about in the sector, for example, Kupiansk, and then further on to Luhansk and Lyman, and to launch offensive operations from different directions. Of course, he believed the breakthrough would be in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, but there weren't enough forces and resources. And
analysts add that there probably still won't be enough. According to information from our Center for Countering Disinformation, Russian army losses in the battle for Pokrovsk exceed both the number of new contract soldiers and mercenaries from other countries. In the AFU,
Drove Solovyov to a complete meltdown. Live on air, the host is shouting and losing his temper because of the strikes on the oil refinery. And this is just the beginning. Panic in the studios of Russian propaganda is growing by the minute. The Skabevs and the Popovs have found a new enemy. It's not Zelensky and not even Trump. Watch next for all the shocking fits thrown by Putin's media lackeys.
This week, Russian propaganda has outdone itself again, both in terms of absurdity and the sheer density of nonsense per square meter. For example, in the studio of the country's chief TV preacher Solovyov, it's thunder and lightning once again.
We can all see what's happening right now. There are active strikes being carried out against our oil refineries. I have only one question. Are we ever actually going to start paying attention to this?
This time, the reason for universal grief and righteous anger was that Ukraine, despite everything supposedly already destroyed, continues to regularly strike Russian oil refineries.
No, I get it. The brilliant idea is to turn off mobile internet and then suddenly nothing will fly anymore. I understand that the brilliant idea is to introduce a travel ban, after which suddenly people can't fly during vacation season and end up sitting in airports. That really helps. I just don't understand what it helps with. And
on one of the propaganda shows, they presented a hero from the front to the audience. A man who looked more like a character from Nightmares than a soldier, with a cheerful smile, talked about how he approached the killing of children and civilians creatively.
As long as you have imagination, you can do absolutely anything you want. We booby-trapped books, we booby-trapped toys, we scattered those electronic cigarettes with poison in them.
Meanwhile, across the boundless expanse of the propaganda, yet another military expert appears, his eyes full of confidence and a hint of fear. Inspired yet somewhat deflated, he predicts that in Pokrovsk, Russian army losses will be comparable to, if not greater than, those in Bakhmut.
The thing is, in Pokrovsk, we still haven't managed to completely encircle it, geographically speaking. And that's why we're forced to push them out, meaning we have to fight urban battles. And the losses there are very heavy, of course, on both sides. For us, they're comparable to those in Bakhmut.
In other words, piles of bodies just to capture a couple of streets and a ruined train station. Also this week, the Orthodox propaganda school was enriched with a new teaching. The Bishop of Skopin and Shatsk-Peterim declared that suffering, it turns out, is actually a joy for the Russian person.
For us, it is a joy. Sorrow for us is bliss, not the absence of sorrow, not overindulgence, not joy, not laughter.
Merriment, laughter, and in general any signs of life, according to him, are an unacceptable luxury.
And the Lord says this, woe to you who laugh now, for you shall weep. Our ancestors, yours and mine, understood very well where their joy was, where their happiness was, and in general where the meaning of life lay. It is up there in heaven, not here on earth. Here on earth, all we have is sorrow.
Just look at how, with a habitual smile on their face and a mad gleam in their eyes, Russian TV once again threatens the whole world with nuclear weapons, presenting it as if it's not the end of civilization at all. And
we will see the hazel tree bloom and finally Poseidon Sarmat. What beauty! Why will you finally see how beautifully the storm petrel flies over the gray, flat sea?
But here, the smile clearly disappears from the face. In the excitement over the great return of the domestic auto industry, Russia presented the new Niva, a certain pride in import substitution and yet another reason for patriotic stories.
Niva, please, I'm begging you. Tell me I just imagined it. Tell me that's not yours. 30 kilometers on the odometer.
Across the Russian expanse, yet another preacher of traditional values made a name for himself live on air. Roman Antonovsky, a zealous Zed monarchist, professional obscurantist, and self-proclaimed Orthodox thinker, suddenly couldn't recall either the date of Christ's birth or the name of his father.
By the way, what was the name of Jesus' father?
Jesus' father was the Lord for us.
The name? The name of Jesus' father. Well, who raised him?
Who raised him?
Who raised Jesus?
Jesus is the Son of the Lord and the Virgin Mary for us.
You're a Christian, you're a believer. You're regularly on the Spa's TV channel. You tell everyone else they should go to church. Here's a simple question for you, the answer to which my 3-year-old daughter knows because, by the way, she was born. By the way, when was Jesus born? Well, there's some date for that.
Well, when was he born for us? Well, he was born 2,025 years ago.
No, the date. The date. Well, the month.
Since the birth of Christ.
So, a person who lectures the whole nation every day on how to properly love God, the Tsar, and the tank turned out to be unable to name even the most basic things from the Bible.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
A striking day, the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed 3 important targets. The Kremlin is in shock. Sensational. Our drones broke through the enemy's defenses and hit the port directly. The Russian fleet is slowly but surely going under. The Kremlin is preparing a second front. Russia has set its sights on a European country, but the Ukrainian armed forces have already given a tough response. Watch for all the latest explosive events you might have missed.
Everything is stable in Russia. The night was loud and bright. Explosions thundered in Tuapse. The local port was attacked by naval drones. The occupiers can't hide on the front either. Ukrainian border guards destroyed 5 enemy shelters along with the Russians inside. Bashkortostan and Vologda also came under attack. 4 military logistics facilities of the occupiers were destroyed at once. Ukraine's defense forces continue clearing Pokrovsk of occupiers. Russian troops have temporarily slowed the pace of their offensive in the city and its surroundings. At the same time, the invaders are blocking Ukrainian logistics in Mirnorad, hoping to break the city's defenses, according to the Institute for the Study of War.
The occupiers are trying to take control of the defense forces' logistics, not only in Pokrovsk, but also accordingly in the Mirnorad area. The sharp increase in the number of attacks in the Shakov area, this is a key settlement that was deoccupied by Ukraine's defense forces, and control over it creates a threat to the entire Russian occupational forces incursion in the Dobropilya direction.
The intensity of fighting in Pokrovsk has decreased, but this does not mean that the Russians have abandoned their plans to occupy the city. The Ukrainian command has plans in place for various possible developments, stated the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky.
The existence of 2 plans indicates that all possible scenarios for the development of events in Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk agglomeration are being worked out. According to the Russian side itself, Russian army losses in Pokrovsk are comparable to those in Bakhmut. Let me remind you, the losses of the Russian occupation army in Bakhmut amounted to about 90,000 personnel.
And while the Ukrainian armed forces are fighting the occupiers, Putin is making new plans. Volodymyr Zelensky considers it quite likely that Russia could open a second front against another European country before the war in Ukraine ends.
The Russian Federation is probing for a weak link in the defense system of NATO countries. In other words, it casts doubt on the very possibility of practically implementing Article 5 of the NATO Charter on Collective Security. In addition, the Russian Federation is constantly trying to raise the level of tension. And at the borders with NATO countries, we're talking about Finland and Sweden.
For the past several years, Russia has been actively using elements of hybrid warfare, although Moscow traditionally denies any involvement. Against the backdrop of Russian drone incursions, Britain is strengthening Belgium's defenses, while in Germany they have admitted that they are not yet ready for war.
It's not just about a shortage of medical supplies, but the German side is also forced to admit that at the moment there is a shortage of both personnel and accordingly equipment for the Bundeswehr. This is precisely why the German government's program is focused on funding both the German defense industry and accordingly strengthening the country's defense capabilities of the German state. That's why it's no coincidence that Germany ranks second after the United States in terms of military technical assistance to Ukraine.
Meanwhile, in Moscow, they continue to rattle their nuclear sabers. It seems this is the Kremlin's eternal scenario. The ever-talking Yusuf Putin or Peskov made it clear that if the US actually conducts a nuclear test, Russia will be forced to respond in kind.
According to Western intelligence agencies, there is currently increased activity by the Russian side at the test site on the Archipelaginaya Zemlya. In other words, this is yet another escalation of the so-called stakes on the part of Putin and accordingly the Russian Federation. Putin fully understands that the nuclear argument is the last resort that the Russian Federation can use in negotiations with the United States at the moment of ending the war in Ukraine.
In turn, Ukraine, together with its partners in the European Union, is preparing a proposal for the 20th package of sanctions against Russia, which should include additional restrictions on the Russian energy sector, the shadow fleet, and companies that support the aggressor's military-industrial complex.
Europe is urgently shifting onto a war footing. The continent is building drone walls, a massive shield against Russian attacks. And here's the sensation. Ukraine will be at the center of this defense. Our experience in destroying enemy UAVs is now saving all of Europe. What is behind this project and who is most afraid of it? Watch this.
After a series of Russian drone incursions, the vulnerability of European airspace became obvious. The old air defense systems can no longer cope. Cheap attack drones, flying in swarms, break through conventional defense schemes and deplete stocks of expensive missiles and combat aircraft. It was precisely this challenge that pushed the European Union toward the ambitious Drone Wall initiative.
Virtually all countries, regardless of region, whether it's Eastern, Northern or Western Europe, have encountered manifestations of this new type of hybrid action by the Russian Federation in the skies, violating airspace. And the fact that a response is needed is already undeniable.
The idea is to create a unified defense system along the EU's eastern border where sensors, radars, satellites, interceptors and artificial intelligence will be able to detect, classify and neutralize threats in real time. We
must create a European system that will enable Europe to develop advanced solutions in the field of drones, drawing inspiration from what is already being done in Ukraine.
It is Ukraine that will play a key role in this development. 4 years of war have made Ukrainian experience critically valuable. Here, tactics are tested, technologies are refined, and production chains for combat and counter-drone systems are formed under real combat conditions, not on a training ground.
Now, drones have changed absolutely everything. And the best drone experts in the world are Ukrainians. I have seen videos of situations where a swarm of drones is deployed against a single soldier. Even a single drone can lure a soldier into a trap while another attacks him from the other side. In other words, we are already seeing how drones are becoming increasingly deadly. This will change the way wars are fought in every country. Not just drones, but also how to protect your roads, how to secure your airports, how to prevent drones from invading your territory. That's why Europe must quickly learn from the Ukrainians how to defend its skies.
Ukraine offers not only experience but also an industrial base. Local manufacturers such as Techex can supply equipment, train operators, share combat experience and standardized solutions to meet Europe's needs. The integration of Ukrainian technologies and expertise will make it possible to create adaptive, fast and cost-effective systems capable of operating in real combat time. Funding is already being worked out through the SAVE instrument and the EU defense budget, which provides up to 100 billion euros for the eastern flank. The drone wall's flank includes 3 directions: aerial, land and maritime lines of defense. which must be integrated into a single system capable of controlling the airspace from the Baltic to the Black Sea.
Judging by the information and the news we read from different countries, self-determination is at the stage of finding or forming a consensus between the internal situation in each individual country, which may require changes in legislation, and how to coordinate these at a common level. In other words, in order to reach a common level, a unified position at the level of the European Union countries and NATO countries, it is necessary to coordinate it within each country, understanding that in some places this requires harmonizing legislation, while in others it requires more thorough explanation to the public so that things are clear. These were very welcome actions. There was support and an understanding of what is important for countries with democracy, where there is a constant electoral process, where any step can be used by the opposition.
This project is part of a larger strategy called Shield 2030. These are 4 initiatives aimed at strengthening the EU's external borders, protecting against drones, creating a unified air defense system, and even providing for space services for military needs. The main goal is to deter Russia and Belarus, especially considering that by 2030 the capabilities of the Russian armed forces may increase. The plan is to strengthen the eastern border by the end of 2026 and by 2027 to deploy a protective wall against drones. At the same time, the EU is creating an integrated air defense system, while space services, intelligence, communications and navigation will support defense tasks. However, experts warn that bureaucracy and slow processes in Europe could delay the project. But if Europe manages to quickly establish this cooperation, the Shield 2030 could become a new line of defense that will protect not only EU countries, but also Ukraine.
Sensational. The mystery of the Nord Stream explosions has been solved. 3 years of investigation, and German detectives have finally delivered shocking conclusions. Who really blew up Putin's pipelines? Why is Europe now divided into 2 camps? Everything that has been hidden for 3 years. Watch it right now.
Nord Stream 2 is an exclusively economic project.
The investigation into the Nord Stream explosions is gaining momentum and threatens to undermine European support for Ukraine. The Wall Street Journal writes about this. On September 26, 2022, the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines were destroyed on the floor of the Baltic Sea in neutral waters. At that time, both pipelines were not operational, but they were filled with technical gas. NATO called the incident an act of sabotage, and Russia's FSB opened a criminal case.
Everyone understands that these were terrorist attacks, but everyone also realizes that too many serious and influential Western figures have something to hide. They really don't want this investigation to be truly objective.
Initially, the investigation was started in Germany, Denmark, and Sweden. Subsequently, those countries stopped their investigations. The investigation concluded that they had no grounds to initiate a criminal case, and that the case itself did not fall under their jurisdiction.
This investigation was conducted in a fairly traditional manner, and the investigators concluded that they could not accuse anyone of this. Accuse anyone. They had no evidence. So for us, the case is closed.
Germany continued the investigation.
We want to discuss this issue. It's not worth speculating. I can only say that we are very interested in clarifying this matter.
German investigators adhere to the version that the explosion was allegedly organized by Ukrainians. According to them, the goal was to reduce Russia's oil revenues and its energy ties with Germany. In total, according to the investigators, 7 people participated in the operation. 4 divers, an explosives expert, and the captain of the yacht Andromeda.
German investigators are confident that they have identified the perpetrators. In Italy, a Ukrainian citizen, Serhike, was arrested. A special forces unit under his command allegedly rented the sailing yacht Andromeda to access the pipelines. The Federal Prosecutor's Office also mentions 5 other suspects. All of them are Ukrainian citizens, including 1 woman. It is believed that one of the perpetrators was killed in the war.
The decision regarding Kuznetsov was made by the Italian appellate court. Initially, the court of first instance refused the German side's request for extradition. However, the investigators appealed the decision and the appellate court sided with them. Kuznetsov is now awaiting a decision on Germany's request for extradition from Italy. The German police have already prepared a special plane to transport the Ukrainian to Hamburg.
Traces of explosives, intelligence data, and so on. We believe that this really did happen with the Andromeda, and that neither the CIA nor Russian intelligence services nor the Russian army are behind it. Many in Berlin are glad that investigations into unknown individuals are ongoing.
On September 30th, Ukrainian citizen Volodymyr Zhuravlyov was detained in Poland. He was wanted under a European arrest warrant. In October, a court in Poland decided to refuse the extradition of the suspect to Germany and ordered his immediate release.
My client is innocent. He has not committed any crimes either on German territory or against Germany. Since the prosecution first asked him this question, my client has consistently maintained that the accusation is abstract and unclear. This position remains unchanged.
According to the investigation, in Germany, Kuznetsov coordinated the work of the saboteurs, while Zhuravlyov sailed a yacht to the pipeline, dove underwater, and planted explosives.
What are the German authorities trying to achieve with this? And whose interests are they protecting? Does the property of the Russian state corporation Gazprom really deserve protection? Should those responsible really be held accountable in such a situation?
The decisive piece of evidence, as stated in Germany, was a grainy black and white photograph taken by a road surveillance camera. It allegedly shows the face of a Ukrainian diver. Warsaw considers Zhuravlev a hero who destroyed the most important source of income for Vladimir Putin's war machine. Judge Dariusz Lubowski stated that the case has political overtones for Germany.
These actions were not illegal. On the contrary, they were justified, rational, and fair. They cannot be considered terrorists or saboteurs because by defending their homeland by any means, they are weakening the enemy.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk also commented on Germany's investigation.
We believe that the real problem was the construction of Nord Stream itself, not its destruction. A Polish court refused to extradite to Germany a Ukrainian suspected of blowing up Nord Stream 2 and released him from custody. And that was the right thing to do. The case is closed.
The decision of the Italian court regarding Kuznetsov's extradition could complicate relations between Ukraine and Germany and turn the Nord Stream case into a diplomatic crisis, according to Wall Street Journal journalists.
Politically, we firmly stand on the side of Ukraine. Russia has been waging a terrible, aggressive war against Ukraine for 3 years now. We are on Ukraine's side. But for me, it is important that Germany is a state governed by the rule of law and that we consistently investigate crimes committed within our jurisdiction.
Putin's German friends, the far-right Alternative for Germany party, have launched a campaign demanding a reduction in aid to Ukraine. This year, that same party celebrated the birthday of the Russian dictator Putin. Before that, they demanded the expulsion of Ukrainian refugees from Germany. That's all for now. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.